What is the language learning plateau? The language learning plateau is the inevitable slowdown that you get once you reach the intermediate level. And when I say slowdown, I mean the rate of change. When you are an absolute beginner, you go from knowing 5 words, 10 words, to being able to go to hundreds of expressions, to being able to talk about your favorite food, to being able to talk about an infinite number of topics. I've made a video before about how exponential language learning goes. But at some point that exponential growth tapers off. It's not quite exponential, it goes a little sideways. I don't know what that shape is called in math, I'm a liberal arts major. So you went from being able to just say hello to being able to talk about a lot of topics. And once you start to get comfortable, you feel like the rate of change, the rate of improvements slows down. That's because it did. You cannot possibly match the speed of improvement that an A1 beginner makes. And with this slowdown comes some losing confidence, it comes with losing motivation, and just some general discouragement. How is this different from boredom, which I separated from? A few weeks ago, I talked about the language learning rut, which in my head is a different phenomenon related to boredom and your routine getting stale. This is not necessarily about your routine getting stale, this is about this inevitable slowdown that happens. You are encountering less new things. You're discovering less new grammars. There are some negative feelings here like discouragement or lack of motivation that aren't really present in the language rut. That language rut is mostly related to boredom. Here I'm not talking about that fickle emotion of boredom, I'm talking about a specific loss of motivation. And what's dangerous about this language learning plateau is you have a possibility of quitting a language or going on hiatus. Once you've lost your interest, your motivation, why study? And if you are self-motivated, like a lot of online language learners are, your reason to learn is gone. If you've liked this video so far, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you want to see more from me, but back to my explanation. There are a few strategies to help cope with getting into this language learning plateau that I think is inevitable. So really it's just a matter of mitigation strategies to make it a little better. One thing you could do is to increase your difficulty. Maybe get a new series for the textbook you're using. If you've been using one series this whole time, maybe hearing it in a different perspective can help you think about the language more deeply. Get one of those books that are comprehensive grammar. Maybe the explanations are easy and it's easy for you to understand, but those are advanced grammars that you'll be seeing. You'll be seeing some grammars that are not so common, but natives know, so you ought to know as well. Even if it's prayer grammar, it's solidifying my knowledge, I'm seeing more sentences, it is making my brain work still, which may help your plateau start to increase again. Chances are, if you're an intermediate learner, you're probably not listening to the hardest thing this language has to offer. You're probably not listening to professors' lectures, you're probably not a master of all varieties of this language, so you can increase the difficulty. In the same way that when you're a beginner, everything seems new and you can't understand anything and everything is so confusing, by increasing your difficulty, you'll be able to reach that point again. Maybe not reach the same point, but a similar feeling of being lost. And that feeling of being lost, for me at least, is a very good indicator that I have work to do. Therefore, I need to conquer this new thing. If you're at the intermediate plateau and you're still using learner's materials, it's time to cut them out. You should be using grammar books or novels made for native speakers. None of these Pod 101 channels, none of these easy languages channels, none of these coffee break podcasts. You need to get into that native level content, because once you get into that native level content, you'll be exposed to a lot of new words again. Unless you're C1 or C2, you haven't seen the hardest this language has to offer, so find it. Something else to consider in this period are the skills you are lacking. Chances are you're not a master of pronunciation and reading and writing and speaking, so focus on one of those categories that is falling behind. Read if you haven't read a novel. Watch news if you haven't watched the news. Improve your pronunciation if you haven't put effort into that. Write an essay if you haven't done that. There's bound to be one skill of yours that's probably falling behind the others. This is the moment to work on that. There is something you can improve a lot. Something else you could do at this level is to socialize more. Try to speak with native speakers of this language in your community. Maybe find a language exchange buddy. There are lots of people on Twitter and Instagram that probably want to learn your language and probably want a language exchange with you. Now is the moment to do that. There's nothing more valuable than having real one-on-one experiences with someone in a social setting, in the actual situation you'd use the language. Not textbook, not theoretical stuff. How would a conversation with a real human play out? And this is something that will smooth out your language skills. Maybe find a one-on-one tutor. They could expose you to things you didn't realize you didn't know. So you're seeing, with all these points that I'm mentioning, I'm recommending you go more into the unknown, because the unknown is the only way you can improve your language. This is the point where your unknowns start to decrease. Increase those unknowns. On day one, 100% of the language was unknown, and now that percent is going down. Increase that percent again by following all these tips. Something I love to do is to cherish every new word that I see, especially if you're at this moment where the rate of new words is pretty low. It doesn't hurt to write it down. As a beginner, maybe you can't write down every single new word because it's just overwhelming, but as an intermediate learner, they start to become rare enough that writing it down is something useful. When I'm learning a language, I like to think about my capture rate. This is something that I've made up for myself, but I like to capture every single new word that I encounter. When I was a beginner, I couldn't capture every single word just because there's so many grammars I don't know, but in the intermediate level, I can really hone in on those words I don't know, those phrases that have some metaphorical meaning, and I want to capture 100%. In the earlier learning, maybe I didn't capture 100%. Now I can get really close to it because I already have a basic foundation. So cherish every blessing of a new word you get. Another thing I recommend is to consider goals that push you. I've talked about creating good language learning goals before on this channel, which you should check out. And I made a point in there about making goals that actually improve you. Sometimes we have the habit of making really easy goals that we would already have done, but maybe when you're in this intermediate plateau level, it's good to do levels that push you a little bit more than you already do. At the end of the day, this intermediate plateau is just a numbers game. Even if you do the same amount of work every single day, you're still gonna hit an intermediate plateau, because again, it's about the rate of change. If I remember my calculus class right, there's something we did about the rate of change, and was it derivatives? I don't know, I'm a liberal arts major. But basically, even if you have the same amount of input, your rate of improvement is going to slow down no matter what. So what we are playing with here is numbers. Increase that input you're getting, increase that effort you're putting in, and maybe that rate of change is not going to be so drastic. In that goals video, I mentioned trying to make a goal that is 10% more than what you already do. If you do an hour a day of language learning, maybe try an hour and 5 minutes. If you do 1 chapter a week, maybe try 2 chapters a week. Again, increasing the amount of effort you put in is going to make that rate of change not so drastic. Hopefully that makes sense and that helps somebody out there. I said earlier, this is an inevitable problem, so I think everybody has experienced this if they've learned a language. Here are some strategies to mitigate that. We cannot avoid this level of language learning, but we can mitigate the problems. All the links to my socials will be in the description below. I also recommend you check out my website at studywithalex.com, where I write about language-related things like this video today, and sometimes I explain problems I'm having with languages in a way that helps other language learners. In other words, I write articles about languages I'm not native in, about questions that I had to solve myself. So thank you for watching today's video. I'll see you for another video very soon, alright? Hoşça kalın.